In the heart of Central Africa, hidden behind tourist traps and forgotten by the world, there was a cage. And in that cage was a soul. His name was Kanzi. He was just a baby when he was taken, ripped from his mother after poachers killed her, sold to a roadside zoo, locked behind metal bars. For 10 years, he never touched grass, never climbed a tree. His world was concrete, filth, and the noise of passing cars. Her name was Dr. Elena Moore, a wildlife biologist in her late 20s, passionate, stubborn, and too idealistic for her own good. Or so her colleagues said. She had come to the region to research primate habitats, but what she found that day at the edge of a village changed her forever. She didn't expect to find Kanzi. He didn't expect anyone to care. But in that moment, something passed between them. Not just curiosity, recognition, pain, maybe even hope. She returned every day. She spoke softly to him. He watched her with those deeply human eyes, and when she learned how he got there, illegally trafficked, denied even the basics of care, Elena made a choice, one that could cost her job, maybe even her safety. She launched a quiet investigation, partnered with conservation groups, and brought evidence to light. It took months. It took courage. It took every ounce of energy she had. But in the end, the government ordered Kanzi's release. On the day they came for him, he didn't run. He just looked at her, as if asking, "Is this real?" He stepped forward, tentative, then into the open transport cage filled with leaves and food. Elena watched, tears in her eyes. It was the last time she'd see him, or so she thought. She thought she had saved him. But years later, it would be Kanzi who returned the favor. Elena continued her work in the region, her heart heavy with the memory of Kanzi. She threw herself into her research, focusing on studying the ecosystems of the rainforest and the behavior of wild primates. The work was demanding, the days long, and the isolation overwhelming. But every now and then, her mind wandered back to the gorilla she had helped free, the one who, in a way, had become part of her life's story. Years passed. Elena found herself taking on new projects, moving deeper into the jungle to conduct field research on endangered species. She often thought of Kanzi, but the years blurred the details. She had to let go of the past. She couldn't afford to dwell on it. The memory of him stayed with her, but it faded in the distance. Her colleagues at the Wildlife Conservation Center said the same thing. "You can't keep looking back, Elena. The work needs to move forward." They were right, of course, but deep inside, a small part of her always wondered what happened to Kanzi. Whether he had found peace in the wild, or if he was still out there somewhere, just beyond the reach of the world she knew. Then one day, Elena received a call from a colleague in the region. There had been reports of a massive storm in a remote area of the jungle where she often worked. Supplies had been lost and her team's equipment had been damaged. They needed help. She hesitated for only a moment. Her legs ached from the long hours of research, and the thought of spending more time alone in the wilderness seemed exhausting. But something inside her told her this trip was necessary. She gathered her gear and made the decision to go. As she trekked deeper into the jungle, the familiar sights and sounds surrounded her, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant call of primates. She felt a strange sense of comfort in the wildness, despite the exhaustion that weighed her down. But the jungle was unpredictable, and the weather turned quickly. That evening, as nightfall approached, Elena was carefully tracking a group of primates when she slipped on the slick, wet ground. Her foot twisted and she fell hard. The pain was immediate, a sharp, jarring pain that made her gasp. She couldn't get up. Her ankle was swollen, and she realized she was trapped, alone. With no GPS signal and the storm growing worse, Elena struggled to stay calm. She tried calling out, but the storm muffled her voice. The only sounds were the wind howling through the trees and the rumble of thunder in the distance. She had no way of contacting anyone. Her body began to shake from the cold. The realization hit her hard. She was stranded in the middle of the jungle with no way to get back to safety. The night stretched on, and her hope faded. Her mind began to race through all the worst-case scenarios, being lost in the jungle, never found. She could feel her strength slipping away, but she tried to remain conscious. And then, just as she was beginning to lose hope, she heard something. The soft rustling of leaves. A low growl. Elena's heart skipped a beat, and she turned, straining to see through the rain. The silhouette of a large figure moved toward her. The shape was unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be... Could it? And then she saw him clearly, his massive frame stepping out of the shadows. Kanzi. The gorilla paused, locking eyes with her. Elena's mind couldn't comprehend the sight. She had never expected this moment, not in a million years. She stared at him, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and recognition. Kanzi didn't seem afraid. He stepped closer, carefully, as if sensing her vulnerability. For a few moments, they just looked at each other, silent, but understanding. Then, to Elena's astonishment, he reached down with a powerful hand and gently touched her injured leg. It was as if he was assessing the situation, trying to make sense of what was happening. Kanzi then backed away and disappeared into the thick jungle, leaving Elena bewildered and barely able to comprehend what had just occurred. Could it be? Could he remember her after all these years? Was this his way of helping her? Her mind raced with questions, but there was no time for answers. She needed to survive. But then Kanzi returned. This time, he was carrying something in his hand. Fruit. He placed it gently on the ground beside her, as though offering it to her. In that moment, Elena realized something. She wasn't just being watched. She was being cared for. And then, just as quickly as he appeared, Kanzi vanished back into the jungle, leaving Elena with a small bundle of fruit and the memory of their reunion. The storm raged on, but Elena wasn't alone anymore. The night felt endless. Elena's body ached, but it was more than just physical pain. Her mind kept drifting, searching for answers to the impossible situation she was in. She hadn't seen Kanzi again after he brought her the fruit, and the realization set in. She was still stranded, her leg throbbing, unable to move. The storm raged on, and she could feel her strength slipping away, every hour dragging her closer to despair. But then, just as the darkness seemed to swallow her whole, there was a sound. It was subtle at first, just a crack of a twig underfoot, the rustle of leaves, but it was enough to snap her out of the fog of fear. She froze, straining to listen, and then she saw him, Kanzi. He emerged from the shadows like a ghost, stepping lightly through the underbrush. Elena's heart skipped a beat. It was him, the same massive gorilla she had freed years ago, the one she thought she would never see again. Kanzi's eyes met hers. There was no hostility in them, only calm, steady recognition. His gaze held hers, as if making sure she was still there, still alive. Elena barely had time to process the overwhelming emotions flooding her chest before he moved closer, the ground shaking slightly beneath his weight with each step. He stopped a few feet away from her, his expression unreadable. The only sounds in the jungle were the pouring rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Elena could barely breathe. Could this really be happening? Was she imagining this? And then, Kanzi did something Elena would never forget. He bent down, slowly and carefully, his large, powerful hands gently reaching for her broken leg. Elena tensed for a moment, expecting pain, but instead, there was only the most tender touch. It was as if he was checking to see how badly injured she was. She watched in stunned silence, unsure whether she should try to speak to him, unsure if he would even understand her. But there was no need. Kanzi seemed to know exactly what was needed. With a grunt, Kanzi stood and walked off again, disappearing into the night. Elena's mind raced as she tried to process what had just happened. Why had he come back? What was he trying to do? Minutes later, he returned. This time, he carried something. At first, Elena couldn't make out what it was, but as he approached, she saw that it was a large bundle of leaves. Kanzi knelt down, placing the bundle gently beside her. Inside the leaves were fruits and nuts, carefully arranged. A gift, a simple, primal offering. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't comprehend it. How had he remembered her? How had he known that she was in need? Kanzi stepped back, his dark eyes never leaving her face. There was an undeniable bond between them, a bond forged in that moment of freedom so many years ago. He stayed by her side through the night, never leaving. He didn't try to approach her too closely, but there was a constant, reassuring presence. Every time Elena thought she might drift off to sleep, his shadow would be there, watching over her. When the dawn finally broke, Elena felt the storm beginning to lose its grip. The rain slowed, the winds died down, and the sun began to pierce the thick clouds above. But Kanzi was already gone, disappearing into the depths of the jungle, as silently as he had appeared. Elena didn't know if he had left to get help or if he was just following his instincts. But in that moment, she realized something that would stay with her forever. Kanzi had come back for her. She wasn't alone, not anymore. As the storm finally passed and the morning light filtered through the thick jungle canopy, Elena's hope began to grow, but so did the realization of how fragile her situation still was. She knew she couldn't stay here forever, but the pain in her leg made it impossible to move. The thought of being lost again in this vast, endless jungle was terrifying. Still, she tried to focus on the fact that Kanzi had been there. He had come back. The days passed slowly. Elena's leg began to heal, but the swelling remained. Her strength was coming back, but it wasn't enough for her to find her way out of the jungle. She tried to keep her mind focused on the small victories. The fruit Kanzi had left her, the moments of connection, and the strange comfort in knowing she wasn't completely alone. It was on the third day that she heard the sound of distant voices, a rescue team just within earshot. Her heart leaped. She called out as loud as she could, though her voice barely rose above a hoarse whisper. But no one heard her. The jungle swallowed her words, and for a moment, she wondered if anyone would ever find her. But then she heard something different, a crack of branches, the soft thud of feet. Her pulse quickened. Was it Kanzi again? She couldn't believe her eyes when she saw a team of park rangers pushing through the brush. They appeared, confused at first, unsure if they were seeing things correctly. One of them recognized her immediately, rushing to her side. "Elena, what happened? Are you okay?" one of them asked, crouching beside her. I was lost. My leg." Elena breathed, trying to steady herself. She could barely find the words, but before she could explain, the team noticed something else. They stared at the thick jungle, where shadows seemed to move in the underbrush. Elena glanced in the direction they were looking. Then, through the trees, she saw him. Kanzi. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his massive form blending into the shadows. He was watching her. For a moment, there was silence. Everyone was stunned. Elena's heart raced. Was he going to come closer? Was he just observing as he had done before? And then, as quickly as he had appeared, Kanzi turned and disappeared into the jungle. The team was speechless. They had no idea what to make of it. Elena could barely find her voice. That was him, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who?" one of the rangers asked. "Kanzi," Elena said. "The gorilla I helped free years ago. He saved me." The rangers exchanged skeptical glances. They didn't understand, but Elena wasn't worried about that. She had seen it with her own eyes. She had felt it in her bones. Kanzi had come back for her. The rescue team got Elena back to the base camp, where her injuries were treated. Her leg was still healing, but her spirit was stronger than it had been in days. She couldn't stop thinking about the gorilla who had saved her. She was sure that no one would believe her story, but that didn't matter. She had lived it. As the days went by, Elena returned to her work, but the memory of Kanzi stayed with her. She told her story to anyone who would listen, But it was hard for people to understand. How could they? They hadn't seen what she had seen. They hadn't felt the raw emotion of that moment, the bond that had somehow transcended time and circumstance. She never saw Kanzi again, but his presence remained in her heart. She knew, without a doubt, that he had remembered her, and in some way, he had come back to protect her, to show her that even in the wild, there are bonds that defy explanation, bonds formed in the most unexpected of ways, between humans and animals. Elena carried that with her, and as she continued her work in conservation, she shared her story, hoping to inspire others to see the world of animals not just as creatures to be studied or saved, but as beings with their own emotions, their own intelligence, and their own capacity for connection. Years went by, and Elena's life continued its path in the world of wildlife conservation. She kept working tirelessly, driven by the same passion that had once led her to rescue Kanzi. Her research took her to remote corners of the globe, studying endangered species and protecting habitats from poaching. Yet, no matter how many animals she helped or how many conservation efforts she spearheaded, she often found herself thinking of Kanzi, the gorilla who had saved her life. She never saw him again. He had vanished into the jungle after that moment of unbelievable kindness, and despite her efforts to track him down in the following years, he was always just out of reach. But Elena didn't feel regret. She felt an unexplainable peace. Their story, his return to her in the jungle, the bond they shared, was enough. It had changed her life, even if the world didn't fully understand it. Then one day, years after the jungle rescue, Elena received a call that would change everything. It was from an old friend who had worked in a nearby conservation area. They were in the process of reintroducing rescued gorillas into the wild, and something unusual had happened. One of the gorillas, an older male, had been found on the outskirts of their sanctuary. He was seen roaming around the area where Elena had been stranded all those years ago, the same part of the jungle. "Elena, we've got something strange here," her friend said over the phone. "You need to come see this." Her heart raced. Could it be him? Was it possible? She had to know. Elena didn't hesitate. She packed her gear and rushed back to the region where she had once been lost. The journey was grueling, but her mind was focused on only one thing, the possibility that Kanzi was still out there. When she arrived at the sanctuary, she was led to the enclosures where the gorillas were being monitored. A large, silverback gorilla sat in the center of the space, his face calm, his eyes distant. Elena froze. She could see it. The same eyes, the same quiet strength. It was him. It was Kanzi. Her breath caught in her throat. She approached slowly, unsure whether she was imagining it. But as she got closer, there was no mistaking it. Kanzi was there, alive, and somehow, he had found his way to the very place where Elena had once been stranded. She spoke his name softly, as if testing the air. "Kanzi?" The gorilla looked up. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. There was a spark of recognition, a connection that had never truly left them. Elena felt the same warmth, the same bond that had been there all those years ago when he had saved her life. Kanzi stood, moving toward the fence. Elena's heart skipped. Could he remember her? Did he know who she was? The sanctuary workers watched, intrigued but uncertain. Elena stood still, her hand pressed against the metal bars, just inches away from the silverback. For a long moment, Kanzi simply watched her, and then, as though acknowledging something deep within himself, he reached out, his large hand gently touching the bars. Elena slowly reached back, her fingers brushing the metal, a single tear escaping down her cheek. He remembered her. After all this time, after everything that had happened, he remembered. The sanctuary workers were astonished. They had never seen anything like this before. No one could explain how this bond, formed years ago in the wild, had survived time and distance. But in that moment, Elena knew. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was more than fate. Kanzi had saved her life when she was lost in the jungle, and now, in a way, he had come back to show her that the bond they shared had never been broken. It was a bond forged in the most extraordinary of circumstances, one that transcended everything they had known before. Elena walked away that day with a new sense of purpose. She continued her work in conservation, but now there was a deeper understanding within her. She had seen firsthand how animals could remember, how they could form relationships, how they could come back when they were needed most. And she shared her story with the world, hoping that others would understand the power of these connections. That sometimes the creatures we think we save are the ones who end up saving us.